Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, here today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to take a look at the recently released Doctor Strange Omnibus Volume 2. This is one I'm pretty excited about adding to my collection. It's been quite a long wait since I got the first volume back in, I think, 2016, so I'm definitely glad to have it in my collection at last. And today I'm going to give an overview of the book and just kind of showcase it, flick through it, share some thoughts, and hopefully just give a good idea of what it's like, really, and maybe help you out if you're on the fence about whether or not to pick this one up. So let's take a look at the dust jacket first of all. We've got the standard variant cover here by Kevin Nolan. I think this is a really nice piece. You've got obviously Doctor Strange there, Claire, some key villains here, Dormammu, Mordo, Nightmare. It's just a really nice piece of artwork overall. There is a direct market variant, DM variant by Gene Colan, the great Gene Colan, whose artwork features in here and is definitely a highlight. So I'll show that off when we get to that point in the book. There's the spine, small font, we all know about that at this point, I think. Little image of Doctor Strange at the bottom. You get a slightly different image down there if you were to get the DM variant. And then the cover gallery on the back. So this picks up directly after Volume 1, as you'd expect. This is the post-Steve Ditko era of Doctor Strange. So we've got Strange Tales issues 147 to 168, and then Doctor Strange 169 to 183. And then some crossovers with other series as well. So a fair amount of content in here. It's a bigger book than Volume 1. I think they kept Volume 1 deliberately kind of short, just so they could keep it focused entirely on the Steve Ditko era, which is a fair decision. Because certainly Ditko, was very much, this was his creation at the end of the day, and he did a fantastic job whilst he worked on it. And when he left, it certainly left a bit of a hole that needed to be filled. And initially, I will say that some of the content in here is a little bit rough. They don't quite match that Ditko quality right from the get-go. So we get the creators in here. So your primary writer for the Doctor Strange series anyway is Roy Thomas. We've got a few different writers that are working on the Strange Tales issues before it was retitled as Doctor Strange, including the final issues by Stan Lee. You've got Denny O'Neil, Jim Lawrence writing some stuff, and pencilers including Bill Everett, Marie Severin, Dan Adkins, and of course Gene Colan. You got your contents page in here. And then moving straight into 147, so the first post-Steve Ditko issue of Doctor Strange. And what you see initially through here, really, firstly by Bill Everett here, in these post-Ditko issues is, and understandably so, a lot of effort being made to kind of imitate and mimic that Ditko style, because he'd established such a unique look for this series. It's no surprise really that naturally you would want to try and continue that flow of things as much as possible, although Ditko is a very unique artist with a very unique style, so it's quite difficult, I think, to mimic his artwork well. But Bill Everett does a good job here. Bill Everett, best known, I think, as co-creator of Daredevil and creator of The Submariner back in, I think, 1939. And a good artist, definitely a good artist. So he does a good job in these issues, and what the story is initially focusing on here, as written by Denny O'Neil, is the origin story of the Ancient One, the kind of wise master / teacher of Doctor Strange. And it's this tale told largely in the distant past. I think we're told it's about 500 years ago, when the Ancient One was a young man and worked alongside another sorcerer who turned to evil, this guy here, Kalu. And it's just it was okay, honestly. That story was not too exciting for me. I think I would argue that the content in this book is just generally not quite as strong as the stuff in Volume 1. I have reviewed that already on the channel some time ago now. And I did praise that book quite a lot because I'm a big fan of what Ditko did with it. And I do think that his loss was felt when he left Marvel and left this series. It took some time, definitely, to readjust, I think, and get Doctor Strange sort of back on track. But by the time you get to the point where this retitles and Doctor Strange gets his own series, written by Roy Thomas, who I think is just a great writer, and when Gene Colan comes on as regular artist as well, by that point, things definitely picked up. But we start to see other characters getting introduced in here as well as we go along. So we see, well, we also see the reintroduction of Claire, who had been a part of the Ditko run, although not too significantly. But she comes back in and becomes a more prominent supporting character in this part of the story. So yeah, I mean, you see her here front and centre. And a lot of this artwork, as I say, you can still see it's mimicking that Ditko style, I think, largely. But just not quite as good. We've got the point here where Marie Severin is illustrating the book. So I think Bill Everett did the first, 5 issues or so collected in here. And all through this storyline, by the way, so we're introduced to another villain, Umar, she's called. She's another sorcerer type character. I think she's the sister of Dormammu, the kind of long lost sister who comes in following Dormammu's defeat at the end of the Ditko run. She kind of takes his place as evil sorcerer ruling over that domain. And in here there's a couple of essay introductions by Roy Thomas which are actually really interesting, and they talk about some of this stuff and obviously his own run. And he raises an interesting point where he talks about how he wasn't ever particularly a fan of Doctor Strange before he ended up taking on the job of writing it, because the main thing really with Doctor Strange, with him being such a magic heavy book, obviously he's a sorcerer, he's using magic all the time, and most of his enemies are evil sorcerers, just evil counterparts really. And he made the point that because it's usually just a case of the hero coming up with a particularly powerful spell or something like that to save himself at the end, it's not necessarily the most interesting stuff. And there's some validity in that point, because quite often that is what the stories are just a case of, just Doctor Strange trying to think creatively on the spot with his magic and come up with something to save the day for himself. Paused here just to introduce the Living Tribunal, who is one of Marvel's nowadays and many cosmic figures, these sorts of ultra powerful cosmic forces, deities even. Yeah, this is the first time we see the Living Tribunal. First full appearance here, I think, issue 158. Still Marie Severin. This is where Roy Thomas is writing just a couple of issues here. This is not when his run fully starts. But there is, to say that it's just not as good as Ditko artwork is not necessarily a fair point. I don't mean to dismiss this work. I think that Bill Everett, Marie Severin, both good artists. They both do a good job here. But to kind of go back to my own review of Doctor Strange Omnibus Volume 1, and even the Ditko era, as much as I liked it, my biggest criticism of it is the lack of variety in Doctor Strange's kind of rogues gallery. So in that book, it was pretty much just Baron Mordo, who we're seeing again here, and Dormammu. And even at this point, both of those are still involved. There's a few more characters. We've seen Umar, we've seen Kalu, but they're all kind of more variations of the same thing, so they're all just kind of evil sorcerers. Now, that's not necessarily a totally bad thing, but I just think that it does mean, for me at least, that the kind of villains we see here are just not as interesting as, for example, Spider-Man's rogues gallery, or Batman's, those sorts of top tier villain characters. This just doesn't reach anywhere near those kinds of heights with these sorts of villains. But that doesn't make them that are bad stories. But I just want to, obviously put my thoughts out there and just be honest about how I feel about it, really. But we're at the point now where Dan Adkins has taken over. And Dan Adkins, I think, maybe one of the earliest examples of an artist who's a bit controversial because of his use of swiping the artwork from other artists, reusing it, reinterpreting it, perhaps, if you want to, or borrowing it, to maybe be a little bit kinder about it. But I suppose how strongly you feel about the whole concept of swiping, and I'm not going to go into it too much here, but yeah, I mean, it's acknowledged that he did do that, certainly, from time to time. And even, Roy Thomas, again, to mention his introductions in here, he mentions it as well. But does also say that he did it well, so I don't know. the morality of swiping, I suppose, is something that's up for debate. I mean, I don't personally think it's something any artist should do a lot. I mean, maybe if you do it rarely for a specific reason, then perhaps it's good, but I don't think anyone should ever over-rely on that as a technique. But that's as much as I'll say on that. So, getting to the point, that's an amazing Jim Steranko cover, by the way. I know it's not the point of this omnibus, but this time Steranko was doing Nick Fury in Strange Tales, and he was doing an amazing job there, and that's just a great cover. But yeah, so in here, we're getting to the point where, that's a really cool splash page though, I'll say that, I like that. We're getting to the point where the series does end, where Strange Tales becomes Doctor Strange. That happens with issue 169, so this is 168, the final issue of Strange Tales featuring Doctor Strange. And here we see Next in his own mag at last. And yeah, one of Roy Thomas's essays here. The guy likes to write, so it's quite a long read, but very insightful. You know, Roy Thomas is, I think he's like a human encyclopedia of of comic book knowledge and history. It's great. So there's always something to be learned, I think, when you read something he's written. And here you go then with Doctor Strange, finally in his own series. This is nearly at the halfway point of the omnibus. And initially, we've got Roy Thomas writing it. Dan Adkins does the first issue here. And what this first issue is basically an expanded origin story for Doctor Strange. So we'd already seen his basic origin back in the early Lee Ditko run. But here we see that kind of fleshed out. And one thing that I think Roy Thomas did do a good job of, something that wasn't really done up to this point at all, including during Lee and Ditko's time in the series, was making efforts to really sort of humanize Doctor Strange and just give him more of a personality beyond being this kind of stoic magician, well, sorcerer. Because that's kind of all he really was, you know, a lot of the time. He was just, you know, very sort of formal character who just purely talked about magic stuff and didn't really have any real world concerns. And I think that was something that maybe alienated him a little bit from readers and just meant that he wasn't as naturally kind of interesting as a character like, you know, Spider-Man. So, for example, you see through here more emphasis on his relationship with Claire. I think Roy Thomas started to utilize her as I said, more of a supporting character. So their relationship starts to develop a little bit. They just go on walks, they chat, you know, simple human things that Doctor Strange had not been seen to do too much of up to this point. Nice double spread here though, featuring Nightmare, who is maybe one of the more interesting of Doctor Strange's villains, because he's not just an evil sorcerer, he's more of a mystic force. You know, he operates within people's dreams, kind of haunts them in their sleep, and very underutilized up until this point as well. So we get to 171, so Tom Palmer at this point, who was a very young and upcoming artist at this point in time, unproven really. He drew this, just this one issue, but then as of issue 172, we get Gene Colan as the penciler, with Tom Palmer sticking around to do the inking. And I think that these two, I mean, Gene Colan's just an excellent artist, known for his runs on the likes of Daredevil, Captain America, Howard the Duck, Tomb of Dracula. The guy was an excellent artist, did some great runs, and his work in here, I think, is right up there as well. And Tom Palmer did a great job of inking him. And this is where the art really starts to change. So from this point onwards, Colan really kind of did his own thing with the artwork. He wasn't trying to specifically mimic Ditko. So those kinds of alternate dimensions and worlds, universes, you know, all the kind of crazy psychedelic places that Doctor Strange would travel to in the past, drawn in that very Ditko-esque way of all sorts of abstract and bizarre landscapes. The artists who came immediately after him were drawing a similar way, and here Colan just doesn't do that. You know, he's got this own unique style of kind of, he uses line work in a great way to sort of create these effects of these sort of almost fog, like a mystical fog, smoke. I don't even know how he drew some stuff in this style, honestly. It's almost like painted artwork at times, but it was all by pencil. And I think it's definitely the highlight artwork in this book. To be honest, whenever there's Gene Colan artwork collected in a book, that's usually my favourite artwork, because he was definitely a great talent. And you also see him experimenting more with, I think, more dynamic panel layouts as well, breaking away more and more from the typical square and rectangular panels. Stuff like this, you know. Really quite, I think, very experimental artwork for the time. Stuff like this as well. Now this is very reminiscent to me of, to mention him again, Steranko's work and how he'd come into Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and really just shaken up the whole conventions of comic book artwork when he did that. And this is, as I say, very reminiscent of that for me. Colan clearly making efforts to bring a unique style to this book, and doing a great job of it too, I think. Great cover here, I really like this one. Just think it's very kind of emotionally powerful piece, just looks great. So I would say overall, if you have read the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko era of Doctor Strange, if you read it in that omnibus and enjoyed that, by the way, this is the DM cover that will be, I don't think this is actually out yet, but will be soon. So that's the Gene Colan cover, inked by Tom Palmer. And this is actually a costume, a newly created costume in this issue that they put Doctor Strange in. But yeah, to go back to my point, if you've enjoyed the Lee Ditko run, I don't see why you wouldn't really enjoy this. Initially, there's a bit of a dip in quality, but it starts to pick up, and certainly by the time you get to here, the actual solo series for Doctor Strange, I think this is really, you know, really good stuff again. What happens in here, basically, the reason he ends up getting that costume is because he is, how best to describe it, kind of, he's sort of mystically attacked, I think. Something happens to him that changes him and means that he wears this costume and this mask. I think it's actually supposed to be like his face. Behind the scenes, it was done because they were trying to boost sales of this book. The sales are flagging. They wanted to try and reinvigorate interest, and so they wanted to make him look more like a conventional / traditional superhero, in the hopes that people might be intrigued and pick the book up. Ultimately, it didn't actually work. This book was cancelled with issue 183, I think it is. The last issue collected in here anyway. This is really cool though. Avengers 61, John Buscema illustrated issue. Really cool kind of flip double page spread here. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. This is actually featuring the Norse deities Surtur and Ymir. So it's a cool crossover story. So Doctor Strange, you know, in his costume, working alongside the Avengers here as a team up. Yet another technique, really, of just trying to boost the interest, the sales in Doctor Strange. This is interesting though. Issue 179 of Doctor Strange was just a reprint. It's actually described down here, literally just a reprint of Amazing Spider-Man Annual 2. So it isn't actually in here. You know, you get the cover to it, but that is not collected. You just jump straight to the letter page. I mean, that issue, that annual is already collected in Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1 and other collections, I'm sure. So I guess that's why it's omitted from here. It's funny how much little stories there are to things throughout this run. So that was done. That reused annual was done because Gene Colan was apparently unwell. He was feeling too ill to draw an issue for that. Then here, the cover of issue 180 was a hastily created cover using a Ditko drawing of Eternity, a photo of New York, and superimposing an image of Doctor Strange onto it because the original issue cover was lost in the mail. But honestly, look at this, like, just fantastic Gene Colan artwork in here. And a cool story here featuring the return of Eternity. Nice pin up there, another Gene Colan work. And, you know, we're getting to the point here then where the series does sadly come to an abrupt end due to cancellation. But luckily, Roy Thomas was able to finish the story that was left sort of hanging in a couple of other comics, which we do get collected in here. This is a cool issue that features the Juggernaut. So I think during this point in time, because of what had last happened to the Juggernaut in the X-Men prior to this, he was banished to another dimension. So they decided that that was a pretty cool premise to utilize him in a Doctor Strange story. And that's actually a pretty unique way I've seen Juggernaut being drawn, as done by Colan. And here we are with 183. So this is the final issue of this series. Interestingly, by this time, Doctor Strange has created an alias for himself. He's calling himself Dr. Sanders to give himself an alter ego. Yet another technique they'd employ to try and make him more like a conventional superhero rather than just a sorcerer who lives on the street. So that was the end. You know, it just sort of ends abruptly here. Issue was cancelled whilst that one was being worked on. I mean, the series was cancelled. And as I said, thankfully, luckily, Roy Thomas happened to also be writing Submariner at this point. So with Submariner 22, illustrated by Marie Severin, he was able to wrap that story up. And almost as kind of a side effect of doing this, of bringing Doctor Strange into this issue with Namor, and then after this, the story continues on into an issue of Hulk. What he sort of, I suppose, unknowingly ended up doing was creating the Defenders. We see here Hulk 126, Roy Thomas writing, Herb Trimp, artist during his long run as artist on The Incredible Hulk. So yeah, bringing together these characters who would end up being the founding members of the Defenders team, and that's where Doctor Strange ended up after this, with his own series having been cancelled. The next few years he was featuring in the Defenders, which you see the first appearance of here, Marvel feature, #1. Although this is just, I think, a prelude story from that issue, which is by Roy Thomas and drawn by Don Heck, that just kind of sets up a return of Doctor Strange specifically to form the Defenders. I think it also shows how he abandoned that costume, fairly short-lived costume in the end, and just went back to his more conventional look. Okay, then you got an issue of Not Brand Ec. I've mentioned this before in other reviews, but I hate it. I just do not like these Not Brand Ec things. They are supposed to be these kinds of parodies, satirical stories, you know, supposed to be funny. They just don't do it for me. But anyway, yes, then we get some cool extras in the back, some original artwork. I will say straight away that the original artwork by Gene Colan just looks great. Very cool to have it in here. I think that was the original cover to that issue 180 that was lost. It eventually turned up, but too late to be used on the comic. Yeah, and that's the variant cover in the back again, just in case you got the DM variant, so you wouldn't be missing out on it. So yeah, that's a look at the content of the book. On the back you get the Eye of Agamotto, by the way, which is pretty cool. Hopefully that's been of some interest, and maybe giving you an idea of whether or not this is a book that you feel like checking out. I think it is worth it. If you liked volume 1, this is overall more of the same. And between this and these two volumes, so volume 1 and this one, you are getting the full kind of pre-Defenders history of Doctor Strange. So it's a pretty cool couple of books to have on the shelf. And but anyway, thanks as always for watching, for sticking around through this video. I appreciate that. Let me know if you're going to be picking it up, if you've read this stuff before, what you think about it, whether you like it or not. Always happy to hear people's thoughts. But yeah, thanks again, and I'll be back again soon with another video.